at part 2 of your final projects. Again, this one's a little bit trickier in a different way. I think you guys did a pretty good job with it as a starting point. Again, I know this is the first time for you guys doing something like this, so there's going to be whatever you would call it, steps, all that fun stuff. But you kind of get the sense or get the idea of how these kind of ads can go. You get a lot of them in like early graphic design jobs, all that fun stuff. So that's why I include it. Let's start again with Simon's here. Let me close that transparency window. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and then back out. So first, I would double check your sizing because it's really should be more. I don't have your sizing at the top. Yeah, but it should be more landscape rather than horizontal. But I think with some adjustments and some suggestions, I think it wouldn't be too hard to adjust. I feel like, let's zoom in a little bit again. Here, your trick or treat for a cause on site night, I think works fairly well. Again, with the resize, that might shift a little bit. You don't have to make, and this kind of goes, well, all of these can go for everybody. You don't have to make the registration mark all that big. You could even do like a mixed case thing, and even bring this down to 10 point because it's just legal. That sounds really dismissive. It's just legal. But you can drop that down for sure. And then we played with it a little bit way early in the Berry Symposium logo. But you can play around with your subscript, superscripts by adjusting your baseline shift. So if you pop that like way up, to 12, then it's more like a registration mark. But those that legal copyright registration marks, all those fun things don't have to be that huge. Again, similar to our legal here is 12. You can even drop that down to 10. Because again, it's sort of just a disclosure kind of statement. But anyway, as far as the design goes, I think if you maybe even broke this up a little bit, trick or treat for a cause on site night on a second line, or maybe made the trick or treat larger and separated it a little bit, even angled it. I think, oh yeah, it looks like your logo, you want to make sure that you're not ungrouping logos and dropping. There's some overlap there, so you're not effectively, this is technically a logo, so you're not stretching it or modifying it. You had some overlap going there. There we go, yeah, and so I think when you moved this somewhere, it got mixed up, so you want to make sure that you're not ungrouping, or if you do ungroup for whatever reason, you need to make sure that you're regrouping and all that should be together. I think this block of text could be arranged a little bit, and again, the resize might help with that. I think overall you have a decent hierarchy starting. You have your headline, you have your tagline, you have your sponsor logos, which we'll get into in a minute. But I feel like you could have maybe this sort of first line be sort of like another subhead, maybe not as big as this. And then you could kind of separate these, this block of text a little bit so it's not such a huge block, and you have your contact information could stand out a little bit more to be a little bit more important. With these three logos, they're sponsor logos. They can be way smaller. You don't want them to be super duper small, but they can be definitely smaller than this, and then a little bit more visually even. They're tricky logos on purpose. So that they are hard to resize. I want to see really. Okay, good. There's a couple. I think at least one of you placed the images rather than copied and pasted. All of these images for this ad are vector images, so you can actually copy and paste them. This makes resizing and working with it a little bit less of an issue. So that since they'd all be vector files, they're kind of a little bit easier to work with for resizing and all that stuff. But again, I think I keep saying it, but with the resize and some organization, definitely making these smaller, making them a little bit more optically even, and you could even have them across the bottom if you wanted, across the entire bottom if you wanted, and then breaking up this information in the middle, structuring your hierarchy just a little bit more. But I think overall a very good start. minimize Illustrator and go to preview. So we'll go to Graces here. So you can see shifting in, this is a good sort of transition to this this version. You can see that the logos here are a little bit more optically even. I would say maybe a little bit too small in this case. Sort of split the difference definitely between this one and the last one we were just looking at. But I think overall they're a little bit more visually. I think you could kind of balance it a little bit more. I think that Lions logo is a little bit optically heavy, or even making the lens crafters in the Triple H slightly bigger. It's a lot of like trial and error. But I think that since the Lions logo is so heavy, it visually carries more weight. I think you've broken up your text really well. Your information is broken up very, very well. I think it's organized in a clear, concise manner. Overall, I think sort of some minor nitpicky stuff again is shifting that registration mark. Again, you can make that smaller and push that up here. You can also, I think that you have your headline and your sort of tags work really well. I think sort of the only really kind of nitpicky thing is adjusting, I guess, things. Is adjusting this the logos here a little bit more, and then maybe even dropping this down a little bit. You have this sort of bottom space here that's a little bit awkward, but even if you kind of pushed all of this a little bit more evenly across, from top to bottom. But what I was going to say was making this potentially a little bit smaller and then breaking this up and making that just a little bit bigger and adding maybe some bold text, maybe not as bold or as large as this, but you want to make sure that your contact info is a little bit more important here than this in the hierarchy. So you could, really just kind of squeeze this down a little bit. Maybe if it's whatever it is, 14-point font, drop it down to 12 and then bring this up to 14. And that might be enough of a shift, or even if you did like a semi-bold with this one that was like, similar in look to this. And I think, overall that would improve the hierarchy just a little bit. But yeah, I think playing with the hierarchy of your information and adjusting logos a little bit, and I think you have a super solid design. And then I think the same pretty much goes, we talked about it in class a little bit, the same goes for this bit too. We have a little bit of that awkward space on the right, just due to I think that's just due to the export, maybe not using artboards. And your artboard was my mouse. Your artboard ends here, I think. So I think that's why you're getting that extra space. We can talk about that in class too. Again, I think overall the hierarchy works really well. I think the sort of minor-ish things here, which I guess aren't that minor, is definitely adjusting the logos. Having them a little bit more placed evenly. Again, even if you kind of went across the bottom in this case and dropped these down a little bit smaller, made the lens crafters a little bit smaller, had them effectively on the same line, and again carry the sort of same visual weight. I think you need to look and see if you've stretched this, because it looks like it's a little bit squished horizontally, I guess, or stretched vertically, whichever way you want to look at it. But I think there's definitely some distortion there. And for yours, you did place these images. When I opened it in Illustrator, I got the missing images warning. And again, these are all vector images, so you can just copy and paste them. You can open them in Illustrator and copy and paste them from one document to the next. Kind of like our very, very, very first assignment. It's hard to remember that far back for sure. But the artboard assignment where we had that logo that you copied and pasted and placed on the different artboards. So in a similar way, I made sure these are all vector files. But I think your hierarchy is set up really, really well. You have your headline, site night. Again, we could play around with the registration mark, make that a little bit smaller, give it a superscript. You have your subheadline. I think that your information is organized well. This looks like you have it slightly bigger maybe. It's tough to tell here. Maybe about the same size, maybe a little bit bigger. And then italics. I would, if you're going to have a difference, it looks like they're about the same size. I might make this like slightly bigger if you're going to have that difference, and even keep it, keep it italics. Basically, that's that kind of like design. If you're going to make it different, like make it different. If it's going to be like slightly different to where you, not that you can't tell, but where it's tough to distinguish between the two differences, you really want to push it. You want to make sure that it's definitely obvious. Like, you don't want to go from like 10 point to 20 point font, but even if this was like 10 and this was 12, maybe pushing this to 14 even, or making it more bold, but basically giving it more a distinct difference. But I think, again, overall, I think you have a really strong design. The hierarchy sits really well. The organization of the text works really well. I think in this case, it's more just organization of the graphics and making sure that you're not stretching, and copying and pasting your graphics in this case rather than placing them into your document. But again, I think overall, super strong start from everybody.